Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Punch, Kick, Choke Chat. Really excited this week. We're Thursday at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time, but we have a guest who's coming 3 hours behind us from Los Angeles, which I'm so excited to chat with tonight. And I'm going to let Sensei introduce him, as always, with our guests. But we're so happy you're here tonight. I can feel the fall weather crackling, and I know that we can see our numbers up a bit tonight in real time, and I get it because it's a really great time to start to snuggle in and watch these each week. I get the pleasure every week of introducing Sensei Nicholas Suino. The basics in terms of martial arts are that he's an 8th Dan in Iaido, a 6th Dan in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, a 6th Dan in Judo. And we always try and find something to talk about with each other this week because we're not just rank seekers, we're friends, and we're training partners, and he's one of my instructors. And I just want to hold this up tonight. This is The Art of Japanese Swordsmanship. And this is one of the books that he wrote when he got back from Japan. And I know that him and our guests tonight are going to chat a bit about their shared experiences there. But the one thing I want to say about this book, Sensei Suino, is that, I've got a lot of books that have kata in them, and I'll learn a kata, and then I'll go to reference the book, and they just don't add up. And The Art of Japanese Swordsmanship, thanks to you introducing me to jiu-jitsu, I spend my time doing karate jits, and my swordsmanship has drifted a little. And whenever I need to remember what's going on, I look it up in this book, and it's perfect. Like, it's a perfect, I need to learn it from you, but once learned from you or Sensei Dauphin, I've never had a book that then matches what I've been taught so well. So thanks for that. And when we interviewed you, we didn't talk as much as I wanted to about the fact that you literally came back from Japan and poured what you knew into this book, like, immediately, so you wouldn't lose it. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And for that exact reason, right? Fresh back from Japan, looking around for a place to train, which I couldn't find. And so, yeah, it was imperative. And I spent that summer before doing much of anything else, memorializing everything into that book.
Thanks for that.
1992. Yep.
Yeah. I appreciate the work you did. How's things?
Things are great. Thank you. Beautiful day in Michigan, and we got news today, finally, after 5.5 months, that we are allowed by our illustrious governor to go back to in-person training in the martial arts with some limitations. But that's been it's been a tough road, and it's going to be tough coming out of this. But I love a challenge, and I love being introduced by you each and every week.
Mm-hmm.
If I got to pick the top 10 things that I've done during COVID, one of them would be figuring out how to get Sean to introduce me each and every time we do punch.
I'll be your hype man, Sensei. You just tell me where and when.
That's exactly right. Just don't punch me, and we'll get along fine. Thank you so much. And it falls to me to introduce Randy Dauphin each week, or when we do this, which is not each and every week, but it's many, many weeks. Not much that can be said that I haven't said, but as you know, and as most of our viewers know, Sensei Dauphin is highly ranked in karate and in Iaido. I know that because his karate teacher is Hanshi Legacy, who I know well, and his Iaido teacher is me, who I'm getting to know well, and I've given him his rank, and he's earned it the hard way, the old-fashioned way. You can always tell the people you care about more because it takes them 3 times as long to get the rank that everybody else gets. Randy's also a world champion in karate. He runs a dojo in Kitchener, Ontario, which I've been to many times. I was there at the inaugural event where Hanshi Legacy taught as well. And I just can't say enough good things about Randy. I still blame him for this whole event, Punch, Kick, Choke, and Chat happening. And I can't wait to see what we come up with tonight. We've got a fantastic guest. And Randy, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Sensei. And thanks for the lessons the other night on the Bokan too. Sensei Suino's been doing some online work. And if you go to the JMAC website, that's the Japanese Martial Arts Center website, you'll find lots of things. One, you could make a donation there and help that center keep going. But 2, you'll find on the calendar that he's just donating his time, and you can do some Bokan work with him. Some people we know, like Doug Nipsil from Richmond Hill Budokan, he's even joined in. So it's been fun to be doing those seminars with you, Sensei, online. 30 minutes of your time. You gain some information and get to see if this is something that you maybe like or further your skill in something that you do like. last week I talked a little bit about Sean Benson, and before we started, being a great martial artist and just a superhuman being. And tonight I want to talk about a person who you never see on this screen, which is Robert Schlumski. He does so much of the heavy lifting for what we're doing. He sets up the links, he sets up the website, he lets people in, he sends out the Zoom reminders, he does the test calls. I mean, honestly, he like makes it so easy for the rest of us to actually do this. And I want to share some information that is public knowledge right now, but Robbie's going to be a dad. Robbie's going to be a dad to twins. And he's going to have a little boy and a little girl. And I've never been happier. Robert started training with me when he was 5 years old, and he's 28 years old now. And it's such a privilege to have been in his life for so long and seen the changes. And if you also don't know about him, he's a super genius, right? He's the right guy to be doing this. He's working on his PhD in engineering at the University of Waterloo. Just a phenomenal human being anywhere. If you ever get the chance to see this guy or train with him, you definitely should. And honestly, he's an assassin. If you stand too close to him and you think you're going to fight him, you're going to find his right foot on the side of your head pretty fast. And when I say pretty fast, I mean really fast. So anyway, I just want to say thanks to Robbie, and thanks to his wife, Lauren, for freeing him up every night to do all this work for us. They're great people, and I'm super grateful for them helping us. So I get to introduce Hanchi Legacy and Hanchi Patrick McCarthy, and I'm excited to just drop a couple tidbits each weekend about Hanchi Legacy. So things that you already know is that he's a 10th Dan, he's a Canadian champion, he has dojos throughout Ontario and British Columbia. He is also, like some of the people on this call, an author. So this is the book you will, by the end of next week, you can hold me to it. By the end of next week, you will be able to get this book if you contact Hanchi Legacy. So he is an author. He's he like Hanchi McCarthy is a member of the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. He's had 3 preeminent senseis in his life, those being Harold Warden, a disciple of Sensei Benny Allen. Again, similar to Hanchi McCarthy, both students of Richard Kim, and his present sensei is Hanchi Anthony Sandoval. One of the things I wanted to talk about, and these are in my own words, but the words that I've heard from Sensei Legacy, is his first introduction to Benny Allen. He was in Don Warner's dojo, and he was sitting on the floor with John Pearson. And as Benny Allen often did not do, he didn't wear a karate uniform, and he was standing at the front of the room with some track pants on and Adidas running shoes and a t-shirt. And he was doing some moves in the mirror, and Sensei Legacy said, hey, John, who's the old guy in the mirror there doing the dance? Right? And Benny Allen heard him say that and turned around and clapped his hands and said, line up. And Hanchi Legacy was a little bit nervous then. And what happened next was Benny Allen looked at Sensei Legacy and said, you come out here. And so Sensei Legacy came walking out and was like a brown belt or maybe a green belt, somewhere in there, and stood there. And Benny Allen said, today we're going to talk about soft power. And he looked at him and just dropped the back of his hand onto Sensei Legacy's chest. And the way it's been described to me is the seat of Sensei Legacy's pants shot out from underneath him, and his butt was driven straight into the ground. And he was giving his indoctrination into what it's like to be in martial arts and be in the presence of a master. And that formulated something that changed the lives of many, many people. That one comment, hey, who's the guy in the mirror doing the dance? You don't make that comment, many things don't happen after that. Another interesting thing about Sensei Legacy, which I'm not going to get into great detail about, is when he stopped training with Richard Kim, if you're not aware of this, in 1975, he traveled to New York City because he thought he was going to see what Kyokushinkai karate was like. And he had the opportunity to fight Katsuaki Sato, who was in 1975 the first world full contact karate champion. And they had a match where it was described to me that Sensei Legacy did very, very well in that match. John Pearson told me that he did very well in that match. So well, in fact, that Sato got really irritated at one point when, was it Nakamura Sensei or Nakayama? Nakamura? Nakamura called him to Koiski, and Sato got extremely irritated while they were in Koiski and backfisted Sensei Legacy in the face. And Sensei Legacy had a lump in his lip for like 4 or 5 months after that from that backfist in the face. Another thing I want to talk about Sensei Legacy is he's just not the sensei who stops you from doing anything. He's always allowed me personally to train with other people and develop relationships both with him and independent of him. And that's why I have a super strong relationship with people like Sensei Suino and Sensei Copeland and Hanshi Montalvo. And so I just want to say he's a good example of what a teacher should be and not limiting you to just only be with him. So thanks so much, Sensei Legacy, for that. And those are the tidbits I want to release about you tonight. And now I'm going to introduce Hanshi Patrick McCarthy. He is a 9-3 black belt. He is also, as I mentioned, a member of the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. He's the author of more than 8 publications. He's fluent in Japanese. He was born in Canada. I think, is it New Brunswick, Hanshi?
St. John, yes.
Yeah, so you and Sensei Legacy, both New Brunswick. Both people born in New Brunswick. And Jean-Yves Theriault. And Jean-Yves Theriault. So lots of great martial artists come out of Canada, out of New Brunswick. He's lived in born in Canada. He's lived in Japan for a long time, Australia. The United States is where he currently resides, and he's trained and taught globally. All over the world, he's trained and taught. In 1989, he established the International Ryukyu Karate Research Society, which, in his own words, an information-based group which brings together like-minded people in the pursuit of common goals while celebrating empowerment, personal achievement, and camaraderie through the traditional fighting arts. He has been a student of Hanshi Richard Kim, as well as Kinjo Hiroshi. Those are both for karate, as well as Shigeno Yashiro. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, in Iaido. And he's also studied jujitsu, shoot fighting, boxing. He's just been around everywhere. He's known to almost everyone we've had on this show, including Hanshi Legacy, Hanshi Terry and Hanshi Burkowski, Hanshi Hind, as well as Sensei Jocelyn and Sensei Copeland. And my thoughts on Hanshi McCarthy is that I've trained with him once. I've met him in person twice, and I've talked with him on the phone a handful of times. Some of my students have attended his seminars and always come back with good feedback on them. But I feel like I know him much better than I actually maybe should claim to know him, because I've read most or all of his books multiple times. The other reason why I feel like I know him very well is because when I've been around him, he's just always open. He's always welcoming. And whenever we meet, interact, he's just happy to share with anything that he has. At the seminar that I was at, I really enjoyed the applications that he had taught in his seminar. I enjoyed them mostly because they were directly applicable to the kata. Sometimes I've gone to seminars where people teach a bunkai and then they try and tell you it's part of this kata, but you can't even really find where it relates. But on the day that I trained with him, things related very well. He's very easy to listen to. If you're ever in the room with him and he starts to talk, you don't feel like you want to talk. You feel like you should just be quiet and listen to what he has to say. The words that I would use is that he's highly intelligent. He's very articulate. He's extremely charismatic. He's confident in his abilities and his teaching because he's skilled in both of those areas. He's a constant seeker of information. He's a person who's devoted his life to martial arts training, teaching, and research. The other word that I want to use, which people might not feel would be complimentary, is I feel he's also controversial. And I mean that as a compliment. I think it's good to be controversial. And Hanchi's controversies have benefited all of us on this call and all of us that have learned from him. He's done lots of things that others have not, which is why he's controversial. He's been successful with his training and his teaching and his research, which is also why people consider him to be controversial. He doesn't accept the myths without the facts, and he's brave enough to present the facts, even if it's not in vogue, which is why he's controversial. His controversy, I will simply call success. And as I've stated, it benefits all of us. His training and his research combined with his willingness to teach and share has helped tens of thousands to learn new things and maybe more importantly, unlearn half-truths. Hanchi McCarthy, thanks so much for being on tonight. And that's my introduction for you. And we're gonna let Sean Benson say a couple of things and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Sensei Dauphin. You know, I look forward every week to hearing your introduction of Hanchi Legacy and our guest. It's such a pleasure. You know, one of the things I was drawn to as initially a karate ka beside me and then a teacher was your love of history. And that includes the living history that we get to deal with every week. So thanks for that. Yeah, to everybody watching. So first off, Robert has dropped in the chat at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Initially, when we were chatting about Sensei Suino, there's the Japanese Martial Arts Center link. And we want your questions. We welcome your questions. Sensei McCarthy has a lot to offer. And the few of us on the call here don't have the range of thinking to ask everything you want to hear. So please drop your questions in there. Robert will vet them and fire them our way. And then lastly, as we say every week, this is called Punch, Kick, Choke, Chat. The chat part's the most important part because we're not all working bunkai. We're not in a room sparring or working kata. So we're just having a talk. And we're all privy to each other's chat. And if you don't like anything that's being said, then you get to dream about it and it gets to punish you in your nightmares. And then you get to wake up and meditate through it and figure out what the lesson was for you. So with that, I just want to say how excited I am tonight as well to hear what our guest has to say. Sensei McCarthy, good evening. I love asking our guests, how does it feel to hear that intro?
Wow. First of all, allow me to say how deeply honored I am to be a guest on your program. That means a lot. And thank you so much for caring and sharing. That's, I'm just, you know, I'm learning so much we haven't even really technically started yet, but I've learned already so much about, and you know, a few of you, as you know, I already know, and of course, Hanchi Legacy I've known for a very long time. I can't really say because it will give away our ages. And, but I'm thinking, it's coming up to 50 years, coming up to 72 is the year I seem to remember. Corner of Dundas and Sensei Warden's dojo, I just remembered being on the corner and I gotta say it's 72. I'm sure 72. So that's what, that's 48 years ago, is that 40, am I right? 48 years? And considering the fact we're only both in our 40s, that's quite
amazing.
That's pretty good. So Sensei McCarthy, one thing I wanted to throw out, and this is part of like a bit of my theme for guiding the conversation tonight. You know, I do some photography and a phrase us photographers have is who shoots the shooter or who writes about the scribe. And the one thing we talked about before is, you know, your breadth of knowledge about other people is so on display. It's wonderful. And we all know that aspect, but I'm so interested in you, and I know we all are as well, because, you know, you're so often the scribe of others that it's going to be really fun to find out what your journey is. So as I love to start with our guests, it's a relatively standard question. What brought you into the dojo and what kept you there when you were young?
Well, just before I answer that or respond to it, thank you. Can I just say, I've been asked many times over the years, you know, about, well, you know, when are you going to write your book? You know, when are you going to write the autobiography of Patrick McCarthy? And look at it, I'm telling you, there's the guy inside me really wants to do that. I mean, I think I really have a very interesting, and I'm sure it will, without question, will be a controversial story to write about. But I was so so passionate about, the historical underpinnings of this tradition that brings us all together. And just so deeply captivated by its anthropology and culture, language, philosophy, its spiritual aspect, the holistic and the pedagogical parts as well, that every time I stumble across something, I get lost for hours, weeks, months, sometimes years. And I got to tell you, on my hard drive, I actually have 5 books on the go right now. So my apologies, 6 really, because one is a revision of a former book. I'll give an example. I was having a conversation with a German guy, brilliant young man from Dusseldorf. His name is Andy Quask. We've known each other for about 20 years, and now he's blossomed into this remarkable researcher, and he's a German engineer, really precision.
I have 2 in my family. I know how they think.
It's
awesome. Yeah, my mother's side is all German. It's awesome.
Anyway, we're talking about something, and I just shifted my attention back to the March 1921 demonstration at Sherry Castle for the Crown Prince who was on his way out to Europe. And the captain of the ship, the fleet, it was a 2-ship fleet. Actually, it was the Katori, as in Katori Shintoru, and it was one of the main ships. And the captain, the commander of the ship was actually an Okinawan named Kana Kenwa. And it's a long story, but and I knew this story very well, by the way, and I've known it for a very long time. But I just, how you just get these epiphanies, it was I call them BFOs, blinding flash of the obvious. And I just thought, this is an area that has not been presented in a way that your average person who's not a historian or an anthropologist or, a passion about, just they're very interested, but would probably like to read about it. They have no idea the impact that this one event had. And actually this one 1921 event is actually tied to another 1921 event that's all about, boxing in New Jersey, of all places, And somebody says, oh, McCarthy's on another journey with that. What big deal happened in New Jersey? Well, thanks for asking. It was the first $1 million gate boxing championship between Jack Dempsey and George Carpenter, who was also a Savate competitive champion and a French national champion at the same time. A tremendous boxer. Anyway, that's just to the Reader's Digest version. The bout took place. It was filmed, like a company like Cathay Pacific filmed it. There was a blimp. It was the most massive audience crowd that had ever congregated for a single boxing match. $1 million gate, unheard of in those days. Anyway, Dempsey takes him out in the 4th round. The fight was not going his way, by the way. That's another story. But anyway, this boxing match gets filmed, and it finds its way to the Tokyo, where it's played in the summer of 1921. Now, you got to remember, this is the Roaring '20s. And you got to remember, only half a century prior to this, Japan had been dragged out screaming from the dark ages of feudalism and had clutched at the foundation of becoming a world superpower. And, you've got the 2 most powerful battleships on the planet, the Kashima and the Katori, being sailed by an Okinawan with the prince, would be the new emperor, would be the Hirohito, the wartime emperor, stopping in a place like Okinawa. It set precedence all the way around. I mean, nobody of any royal distinction from the Japanese emperor had ever been to Okinawa before. They say that the population of Okinawa in those days was 600,000 people. Right. 599,000 of them were out on the shores at Nakaguzuku Bay waving and watching this guy come in. It was a remarkable event. So this event and the boxing event play such an integral role in shaping the foundation for what brings us together. And so I had this thing, and I dove into it, and bang, I was off,
this is your next book. This is what you're working on.
I'm still writing that chapter, you know, to give an example of how crazy I am. Another time, I'm in Tokyo, it's in the 80s, and the guy says to me, he goes, hey, did you see the thing? They just discovered this temple tomb in Egypt. And you know, by this time, you know, I was, you know, yes, karate comes from New Brunswick. Oh, it doesn't. Oh, no. And then they said, oh, you back in the 60s when I started, it was like, no, karate is from Toronto, Mr. Soroka. Oh, Toronto. I'd never met a Japanese person before. So I go, I can. And then in 1970, my family moved to Toronto, right? So then, I found out that karate is not from Toronto. It's from a place called Japan.
So let's back up just a little from that Toronto to Soroka. What brought you in that dojo from New Brunswick? What made you walk in and what made you stay?
I don't know how much time we have to talk tonight, but I'm going to tell you, you'll see that I'm one of these guys who jumps on a horse and goes in 7 different directions and then ties the shoelaces at the end, I promise. It's a thing I learned in Japan. I eat a skid. So, okay, I'll go there first then. I go to school. It's, you know what it is? It's next week, 54 years ago. It's the September, it's when school starts in Canada, and a long weekend. It's Tuesday, I go to school. I'm in St. John, New Brunswick. And I don't remember much about school these days, but 2 things I remember about that particular assembly on the day was Buffy St. Marie, a singer, a Canadian singer, who I always try to tell people in Australia and Japan who she is, but you would know who Buffy St. Marie is in the auditorium, and she's going to play a song and sing it for us, right? So there was her. And then after that, there was a film that was played for us. Which was the documentary film by the Canadian National Film Board, the Judoka, which featured Doug Rogers, a Canadian airline pilot, went to Japan for 6 weeks, stayed 6 years, he fought everybody, trained with Kimura, you know, all that type of stuff, married, you know. And so, you know, just time out for a minute there. Little did I know my life would actually be shaped a lot by this film. So, you know, come on, I'm a kid. I'm literally a kid in those days. You know, I'm like 13 years old. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, my Little League baseball season had finished. And by the way, I wasn't actually 13 then, I was 12. I didn't turn 13 till December, by the way. I'm something like 12. So I can't play Little League baseball anymore, which is another story. We went to the World Championships, which were played in Expo, Laurent, Man in His World in Expo in 1967. That's a separate story. And so I'm pretty excited. And, you know, come on, I'm a kid. I like Batman, Superman, The Flash, all the superheroes that you really want to be type of thing, you know. But you know they're just cartoon characters, right? But here I'm watching on this film the transformation of this guy who, next to, say, Anton Giesink, who took the gold medal that year in 64, as you know, Rogers took the silver medal. I mean, these guys were Hulk of people. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, when I leave school today, in fact, I might go home early, I'm taking that up immediately. And as it turned out, there was a club like a 20-minute walk from my house. But the club was the St. John Judo Club. There were no karate clubs at the time. Right. There were no official karate clubs at the time. Although if you read Karate New Brunswick website, they'll say something else. But I'm telling you, take my word for it. There were no official karate clubs in St. John, New Brunswick at the time. And so I go upstairs. It's on King Street upstairs. It's called the St. John Judo Club. I go there and they say, "Oh yeah, you can join." I'm with my mom. Right? You can join, but you've got to come back. This is not the day. You'll have to come on Saturdays, and it's like in the morning. And it's not actually here. It's over on the YMCA. And I went, YMCA, Saturday morning, got it. Anyway, it's a few days later. Now it's Saturday. You know, my mom, you know, I'm 12. I can go out by myself in those days. You know, those days you go out and, you know, be home before dark, you know, and yep. I'm out. I go up to the YMCA. I got my little track, you know, I got my shorts and stuff. I got ready. I got my $2 to join. I got my $2, and I go down and I ask the guy at the counter, "Where's the judo?" And he says, "It's down on the it's on the inside gymnasium." Blah, blah. Anyway, I go down and there it is. It's a judo room, and it's like really cool. It's much smaller than the St. John City Dojo. at Dutchy Shell's dojo. But it's still, I go, great. And there's like maybe 8 or 10 people there. And, they got the white gi on and they're, color belts and they're, doing all the moves. And I'm going, this is pretty cool, man. This is not exactly what I saw in the movie, but, that guy's like a Olympic champion. And I go, good. And the guy says to me, he goes, and the guy's name is Adrian Gomes. He's a university student, UNB. And he's there with his girlfriend and his girlfriend's brother and a couple other guys and a British guy. And he says, are you here for training? I went, yes, sir. I'm joining today. I got my money right here. And he goes, come on over here. Give me the money. Give him the money. Sign me up. I started practicing. The other thing I remember of that first day was there was a guy, my dad had a bit of a reputation. He liked to drink and carouse a bit, and fight. And he wasn't liked by the local constabulary very much, And there was a guy in the dojo, his name was Lenny Tom. And he was a police officer there, by the way. And he goes, oh, you're Joe McCarthy's son. I'm like, yes, sir. I hear you. He goes, oh, you'll be sparring with me today. And I just remember going, what's sparring? Well, he continued to make an example of me for a very long time, by the way. That's another story to get back to. But that was my first entry into a dojo. And it was karate, not judo. And the guy's name was Adrian Gomes. And he was a green belt. Not many black belts around in those days. He was a green belt in Kyokushin karate, loosely associated with a movement in New York, which wouldn't become official until the 70s. And he was actually giving us lessons out of a book, the 1950, I still have the book, by the way, 1957 book by Oyama Masatatsu called What is Karate? And another interesting thing just about that book, by the way, in that book, in the back section, you will see Peter Urban, you'll see Richard Kim, you'll see Gogen Yamaguchi. All of these guys are in that book from that era. And later those guys would become friends and mentors and senseis as well. I would meet and train with Gogen Yamaguchi in Japan, and I would meet and train, of course, with Peter Urban. Sensei Urban was our senpai for a while. And then, of course, Richard Kim as well, so which we all know type of thing. So that was my first introduction, 1967, St. Joe, New Brunswick. And in 1970, I went to Toronto. And interesting story. I'll just say this part, then I'm going to go back to my other story, okay? Is when I got to Toronto, I lived in Scarborough, by the way. And so while I would later discover that Kwai Wong had a dojo on Brimley and Brimley and Lawrence, and there was a few other dojos around. In those days, and by the way, I knew guys from St. John back in the days. A couple of guys I knew who was Satan's Choice back in the day. Dave Green, his brother Bobby Green, guys like that they had joined Soroka's dojo. Soroka had opened a dojo there, I think, the following year, 1968. And so I knew those guys. So I got Soroka's address in Toronto when I first came, by the way. But to get to his dojo from Scarborough, I had to take the bus I lived in Markenegg, and I used to take the bus down to Warden Station. And I take the train from Warden Station down to Bloor and Eglinton, okay? And then Bloor and Eglinton, I could either take the train, I get a transfer, and take the train all the way down to Dundas Street and then take the tram across, or I could walk down Yonge Street. It's 1970. It's the summer. And Yorkville, I never, like I told you, I never met Asian, I met 2 Asian people, by the way, in 1967. Ask me later, I'll tell you who they were. Hisataka Masayuki and Dr. Chitose, by the way, with Soroka in Montreal. That's another story. And anyway, I get to Dundas Street, and you turn right, heading towards Spadina. That's Chinatown. Chinatown in 1970, man, I've got to tell you that. The sights, the sounds, the smells, the girls, it was fantastic. So I walk down the street and I get lost. And just right around the corner on 14 Hagerman Street upstairs used to be the old Qingmo Athletic Association with Jackie and Jay. These were 2 Chinese guys who taught a kind of an offset of Hungar. That's where I met Robin Young, by the way. You guys know Robin Young from Kitchener. Robin's a few years younger than me, and I would have been, so I moved to Toronto, I turned 15, so I was 14, turning 15, coming to Toronto, and So Robin had to be maybe 10 or maybe 11 at the most. And Rob Mustard was the other white-skinned guy at the Chinese Kung Fu school. And you probably don't know the name Robert Mustard from Kung Fu, but Robert Mustard, you might know him from a book called Angry White Pajamas. He's now Hachidan, 8th Dan in Yoshinkan Aikido from the old police dojo with Shiro Sensei in Tokyo. And anyway, so and those guys were just kids when I used to go there. So I'd sneak up there, grab a class, and keep going down and stop at the Something restaurant for a bowl of rice or something. I go down a little further on the other side. There was a Mahjong Lawhorn school there, which is the drunken beggar style. And then across the street, there was a Dave Senior and Dave Junior ran the Canadian Karate Kung Fu Association. They had been Hung Gar Kung Fu stylists from Hong Kong who came to Toronto. And as kids, they went to Soroka's to train. And they didn't like it over there. And, you know, it was an insult for Chinese that, you know. So they kind of combined the two together to create Canadian Karate Kung Fu Association. They used to train up there. And then, of course, you keep going down, and then you get to Spadina Avenue. You turn right, just up around the corner was the old Pagoda Theater. And in those days, for 50 cents, I think it was 50 or 75 cents, you could see the matinee, you know, Five Fingers of Death, you know. And if you hit under the chair, when it was over, you come out and stay and watch it 2 or 3 more times type of thing. So, because on the way home, you could, you know, you could like break off a branch going through the forest and fight imaginary enemies and stuff like that. You know, you're super motivated. So I was a member of like 3 or 4 different clubs at one time. And then one day I get a look at this demonstration at a mall. And I just, wow, that's like the coolest thing I've ever seen. I had no idea what it was. And I remember asking them, what is that you're doing? It's Kung Fu. And I went, doesn't look like any Kung Fu. You know, by this time I know a little bit about Kung Fu. You know, not a lot, but I know something about Kung Fu. And I said, what kind of Kung Fu? Well, he says, it's actually Indonesian Kung Fu. We call it Kung Tao. And I went, oh, Kung Tao. Pretty cool. And the guy's name was Dave Houston. A little bit far out there, but he was a guy who ran a club, was attached to guys like Art Sykes, Tommy Pepperman, guys like that on the New York side and Erie, Pennsylvania side. And he was teaching a style called Liu Xiong Royal Kung Fu, which was Kung Tao. And from what I understand, many years later, it was a little bit of a more of an eclectic or contemporary approach to looking at Indonesian silat, and Kung Fu is what it was. And then by that time, I had some problems in school as a kid, you know, and so my father asked me to leave rather early, you know, and I was looking around for a job, and the only job I could get, by the way, in those, I liked fighting, and the only jobs I could get was working at the door of a couple of clubs. Mm. So out where I lived in Scarborough, there was a club called the Nobby Hill Hotel, and you know, in those days, drinking age was 21, by the way, in Ontario. I don't know what it is anymore, but in those days it was 21. And I mean, I'm like 17. I mean, I'm not even at drinking age. I'm not even allowed to drink, and I get hired to work in a club. Mm-hmm. It's so funny. I met a lot of people in those days. You know, Sam Molesky and guys like that, who we know from Toronto. But he used to work over at the Scarborough House and places like that. You know, the Running Pump, which we nicknamed the Running Dump. And so anyway, the idea here is that working in a club like that, where there was a lot of, you know, physical violence, you kind of got a hands-on feel for what works and what doesn't work type of thing, you know. And I remember I met a guy in there so it would be early in 1972. I met a guy, and he says, oh, you know, I said, we're looking for a guy to work. And I went, oh, yeah, like a real job? He goes, yeah, it's like a real job. Yeah, like real money. And I don't have to fight. He goes, no, you know. But, you know, by the way, in those days, I remember it well, it was $20 a night, all the beer you could drink, all the girls you could meet, all the fights you could get into. It wasn't actually that bad, you know. And when you're a kid, you like that type of stuff, you know. So these days, you would never do something like that. In those days, it was, you know, challenging to say the very least. Anyway, I took this job, and the interview, it was a company called High Point Trading. And I had to go for the interview, and the job was driving from Cambridge, Kitchener, Guelph, Sarnia, Waterloo, down to Windsor and all the little shop, and all, you know, like St. Thomas, London, all these little places in between, to deliver dry goods for Max Milk and things like that. You know, it was like, I don't know if you remember, is Max Milk still around? Max Milk, no? It's like a 7-Eleven.
No idea. I grew up going to Max Milk though in Guelph for sure.
Used to be like a 7-Eleven, you know. And in 7-Elevens you can buy, well, today you can buy a bottle of whiskey there now. But I mean, in my day, it was like kind of a convenience store, you know. But back in the back, they'd have a section where you could buy like a bottle opener, or, you know, dry goods, or, you know, things like that. And my job was to refill, you know, go in, find out what they had, what they were missing, and refill it, take the orders, and make this circuit. And the closest place in the middle of all this was to live in London, Ontario.
Right.
That's how I get to London, Ontario. So I don't know anybody in London, not a soul. And I remember looking around for a place to live. And I remember going, there's a park in the middle of London, you know, and so I said, I'm going to go over to the park, do a little bit of stretching, you know, and stuff like that, and do a little bit of some kata and things like that. And I meet this kid. And this kid is, you know, he's around like my age, you know, maybe he's 1 year younger or so. And he goes, so what are you doing? I said, I'm training. He goes, oh, maybe you'd like to, you know, train with me. And I said, what do you do? And he says, oh, I'm doing Kung Fu, karate Kung Fu. And I went, oh, who with? And as it turned out, I actually knew who they were. These were Dave Chong's guys in London, Ontario. And there was a club run up at a boys club called, I think it was called the London Boys Club, I think. I can't remember for sure. But the name of the club, it was called, Sensei Legacy, do you remember the name of that Ron Lysted's club there in those days?
I don't remember the name of it, but I know Ron.
Yeah.
I don't.
Anyway, it was Canadian Karate Kung Fu Association. Anyway, and I joined, and a guy by the name of Ron Lysted was the chief teacher there at the time under the Chong family. And I started training there, and I met a bunch of people. Some of those people I still remain very friendly with today. Ken Talek, for example, from Kingston, Ontario. Ken was one of the young seniors there. Dave Durant, Jim Grass. And it was through this group, and Bruce Curry, for example. Bruce, if you're out there, hello, brother. It was through this group that we would come into contact with a guy named Dan Pai, or Daniel Pai, who ran a group called the Fire Dragon Pai Lum Kung Fu Association. And it was a big deal, you know. We used to, when we hooked up with him, we were going everywhere to do demonstrations, and we'd go up to the Mustang Theater, the drive-in theater in St. Thomas, and you know, some of the places, and do demonstrations. And he came. Do you remember what year it was Pai came to London? Would it have been 72, 73?
I would say yes.
Yeah. And so anyway, you know, he was like the Pied Piper, and I just followed him. You know, as I told you, I had issues with my father, and so this guy became kind of a surrogate father, you know, and I kind of ran away with him. I don't think I was in London a whole year, to tell you the truth. And I was gone. When he invited me to Hartford, Connecticut, to kind of be a live-in student. Bruce Curry had already gone. Bruce left, and so I went too. And it was the two of us. It was Bruce Curry and myself, and we took shifts kind of going over to Morgantown, West Virginia, then to Hartford, Connecticut. And we lived in the dojo. We were like dojo rats. And lived in the dojo.
Real quick, Sensei, just to interrupt a little. So you've come from the East Coast, you've come through Toronto, you've worked with some Kung Fu guys, you've worked with Soroka there, and then now you're in London. So you're really already getting a really broad picture of styles as you're doing this, right? Like, are you naming yourself as doing a certain style at this point? Do you care about that? Because I know we're getting to around the time where you open your own dojo.
Yeah, no. Look, here's what happened was, you know, in those days you couldn't say, you know, like, for example, when I went to the Jingmo, I wasn't saying, oh, I'm a member down the street at Dave Chong's club. When I went to Hong Luk, for example, I didn't say, you know, oh, by the way, I'm actually at the Jingmo as well, or I'm not. You never did that, you know. When I used to go, for example, I was never a member at Hong Luk Kung Fu Club. I was never actually a member at Jingmo either, by the way. You know,
right?
I was a member at the Canadian Karate Kung Fu Association, but and I was at Soroka Dojo as well, by the way. But what I used to do is I used to go there on Saturdays or on the weekends when I was downtown and go and sit and watch a class, talk, get friendly, you know, and I used to know a girl, her name was Ann Jepson, and her dad, Dennis Jepson. They were training over at Hong Kong Kung Fu Club in those days. And there was a couple of Irish kids over there as well. I used to get along with them, was Mick and Martin McNamara. They would when they left Hong Kong Kung Fu Club, they opened a club called Twin Dragon Kung Fu. They were twin brothers, by the way. Tremendous shape, love fighting, early kick. Sensei Legacy will tell you, when we used to go down to all those early kickboxing bouts down at the Elmwood Casino back in the 70s, mid-70s, they were Kenny Clark and all those, Kenny Clark. All those guys from Twin Dragons would come down and fight in the tournaments as well. So that's how far back that goes. But so that's just a little bit of that. And so I spent the end of 72 and 70, much of 73 in the United States. And I can remember coming back for Christmas to Toronto. I took a flight up from Hartford, and I arrived at the airport, and my parents picked me up. I went home and, you know, spent Christmas and lots of fun with family, stuff like that. And then, you know, a couple of weeks into January, I said, hey, Mom, thanks, going. Got my backpack, I don't know, $35 or something like that, cash in my pocket. I go, and I got my return airplane ticket. I go out to the airport. I'm going through immigration. And you know, in those days, you didn't have passport, driver's license, ID was good to go type of thing, you know. And I'm at the airport. It's January 1974. Show my ticket. He goes, where are you going? And oh, I'm going to Hartford, sir. What are you going there for? Just to visit my friends, you know. Who are your friends? Oh, Daniel Pai, Kung Fu, I love Kung Fu, you know. And, oh, yeah, okay. When are you coming back? I'm not sure, 100% sure that, you know, maybe a couple of weeks. Where's your return ticket? I was going to get it when I get there. It's cheaper down there, you know. I'm not believing this. You have $35, a bunch of Kung Fu stuff in a bag. You're like a teenager. You're not going. I'm not letting you in the United States. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. And so I had to go back home. I went, oh my God. And the only kid that I actually knew really well in those days from my old neighborhood was a kid who used to go to Cedar Brae Collegiate. I went to Laurier, by the way. And the only two events I ever really got involved with were wrestling and gymnastics. I played a little bit of football as well, but wrestling and gymnastics were my thing. And because I lived so close to Cedar Brae, and my Laurier was much further away, but I was on that cusp, you know, on the cusp. I would go to Cedar Brae and sneak into the gymnasium to use their gymnastics facilities, right? And so the only kid I got to know up there was a kid named Ron Beer. So Ron Beer became like my kind of surrogate student, so to speak. Became my first black belt. And so we've known each other almost from the very beginning. So anyway, he says to me, I contact him, I say, yeah, you know, I'm trying to go back to the States. He goes, this may be Providence. He said, I've been training down on 1561 O'Connor Drive in East York at a Kung Fu club called Yao Lung Kung Fu Center. And I went, never heard of it. He goes, yeah, it's kind of new. It's only been there like a year or so. And he said, but it's really great. It's run by some Chinese guys. His name is Lung Ong Bill Jong. And the former instructor was a guy named Mo Chao. But they got rid of him. He's not there anymore. There was some political issue. So he's not there, and they're looking for a new chief instructor.
Right.
And I went, oh, really? Oh. I think this is the job for you. And I went, great. So anyway, long story short, as I go down for an interview, they say, we're not actually looking to hire anybody. He says, we're looking for a business partner. And I went, well, I got like $34 left. I used to get down $34. And so what they did was they brought me on as a equal business partner for $5,000, and I would have to, and they would provide a salary, you know, and from the salary, a couple $100 of that a week would go to them. I lived in a dojo. And so that's how I got into Yaolong Kung Fu Center as the instructor, so to speak. And that was a remarkably wonderful learning experience for me there. And so now I'm back in Toronto, and I'm those days, Hanshi Legacy will tell you, I mean, we just lived for the martial arts. So we weren't doing anything else. It was every weekend there was one or two tournaments everywhere. I mean, and if there wasn't anything going on in Toronto, which was highly unusual, we'd go to Hamilton or London or St. Kitts or Niagara Falls, Buffalo, Syracuse, upstate, Erie, Youngstown, all over the place. And you got to know all of those people, And so this question you asked earlier about, what was your style? So when you went to tournaments and fought, nobody cared what your style was, because nobody was, style based. You were just banging people, I remember some people used to like to fight sideways, some people straight on, some people would, lead with a right side forward. It was all different stuff.
How'd you like to fight? What was your style? How did you set up? What were you looking for in the ring?
Instead of how big I am today, I was a very, very small guy. I was always around 175 pounds. And I wrestled under 172, and being a gymnast, I couldn't afford to be really very big. And so, yeah, I was always a lightweight, and so I was quite fast, but not terribly powerful. And so I kind of gradually found my way out of fighting in lightweight and bumping myself up to heavyweight because I was fast. I could kind of get in and get out. And those were the days, Hanshi Legacy will tell you, was there tended to be two types of fighters. There were the technicians, and technicians I found came in, usually a couple of different categories. Like, for example, I was just talking to Don James today. I don't know if you remember Don James he was an ITF Taekwondo, Toronto, Ontario, Canadian world champion. And those were the days when the Taekwondo guys, they weren't doing Irish dancing. I mean, this was these guys were good fighters back in those days. Anyway, he was a great fighter. Masterful timing. I always thought he was never much, I shouldn't say that. He was a great technician, but he was never one where I stood back and went, wow, I'd like to be like when I watched Slokey fight, for example. I'd watch Wally Slokey and I go, and I close my mouth because he was so technically good. I watched that Don James fight, and he would masterful timing. Now, I didn't think particularly fast. I didn't think, he had certainly great technique, but his timing was impeccable. So, and then there were the monsters, and I fought a lot of monsters.
And were you more a fight guy, a Kabuto, or a kata guy?
No, I did it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did a kata, fighting and weapons. And by the way, I also did in those days. Not those days. I remember Vince Castellano's tournament out in the Mohawk College. They started introducing. You can do soft style kata, and you can do hard style kata. You can do Chinese weapons. So that was good for me because I could do it all. I didn't mind. If there was another event, it was another trophy. So I could. I'll do the weapons. I'll do a kwando here. I'll do a bow over there. I'll sai or kama. I'll do a kata here. I'll do a kung fu form there. And I remember once I went to the 1978 North American Taekwondo Championships at Ryerson College, downtown Toronto, with Kyung Lee was the sponsor there. I remember. Do you know Bill Hines? Bill Hines? We're talking about Benny Allen. Oh, well. Long story. Anyway, I go there late. I'm late getting there. I forget my gi. Sensei Slokey's there. He lends me his gi. So I got the Slokey. I remember on the back it said W Slokey Canada on the back. So I got the gi on. I go in. I'm fighting heavyweight. Maybe I fight 7 fights. I win first place. Not very many. Do-hee Lee, who was the lightweight champion, and a young Korean A-class fighter from Park Chung-soo's up on Yonge Street. Park had many Park Academies in those days, right? Park Institute, Jung Park Institute. He must have had 15 fights, and he was exhausted, which was good for me because he had these like rubber legs like Bill Wallace, Daniel Roche, just, but he was exhausted, and he just finished his fight. I was fresh, heavyweight versus the lightweight for Grand Championship. Oh, I would scoring massively on him and not giving any points. And there's George Beatty, the Army Rizzo, Wally Sluggy, Bill Hines, Benny Allen. These guys are all on the sidelines going, give it to him. You're cheating, or give him a point, It's getting pretty hot. Anyway, and I remember that the first place Grand Championship was a trip for two to Florida. I said, it's great. I could take my girlfriend Vicky to Florida. This would be fantastic. And I'm telling you, Dowie is not doing a very good job at all. And out of the blue, he flips out a round kick. And look, it had to be 5 miles from my head, and boom, he gets a point. Oh my God. I mean, I was, you're in the heat of a battle, and this guy gets it's not even a point. You get a little bit upset. But everybody on the sidelines, they were great. Anyway, long story short, is I lose, and it was that was the point, by the way, that was the deciding. And I was sinking my fist into his body and not getting any taekwondo. You don't get a point for that type of stuff, right? And anyway, he wins. George Beatty and Bill Hines grabbed my heavyweight. What's a nice trophy, those today we don't care about trophies, but in those days, look good in the dojo. It was good for business, right? I had this really nice big trophy, and George Beatty and Bill Hines grabs my trophy, and they go out in the middle and they're screaming at the referees about I got cheated, and I smash my trophy on the ground, and I go, and there's like almost a riot, and I'm beside myself, like, what? That was my trophy. What happened to my trophy? But no, styles. So I had done Kyokushin karate. I had done Chitoryu karate. I had played with Honga Kung Fu, Dopai, Hong Sing Cholifa. I had played with a little bit of Wing Chun up in London, Ontario. Was a guy named Frankie Cito was an instructor from Niagara Falls back in the day, and him a guy named Russ Level, a London-based kid, loved. We had another guy named Paul Chow, who's still around, tremendous shape, Black Dragon from London, Ontario. There's some northern stuff and some China. So you were kind of doing a little bit of everything, but you were never allowed to say, right, yes, I train at all these schools, because it was unacceptable at the time. And the only person who was saying that it wasn't unacceptable in those days was Bruce Lee. And there was no Bruce Lee clubs around that I knew of anywhere. The guy died before I even really had a chance to, figure out what Jeet Kune Do was all about. And so I can remember as if it was yes. I have a pretty good memory, by the way. People will tell you, the thing is, don't show McCarthy a kata, he'll steal it from you, type of thing. I have a very sharp memory anyway. So it's October 1977, and I'm talking to Sensei Shloki, who had really helped mentor me a great deal, particularly in point fighting. And I started kickboxing with him, by the way. And by the way, he was just telling me yesterday morning that he's got some old footage of us from the old Brampton dojo with Robin Sweeney and guys like that. That's another story. And so I said, I'm getting a little sick and tired of the politics and this and that. And he said, here's exactly what he said to me. He said, why don't you call Donnie Warner? He said, call Don Warner. Don's bringing a guy in next month or even later this month. And he's, this guy's, they call him the Harvard professor of karate, man. There's nothing this guy doesn't know. And if you're looking to settle down into something a little bit more traditional, give him a go. And I remember because, Benny, Master Benny Allen had talked about him. And I remember very well the connection to him back in the day. And I thought, okay. So anyway, October 77, boom, I drive down to Hamilton. Donnie's very nice. He lets me stay at his place, and I meet Richard Kim for the first time. I'll tell you, I just hit it off with that guy right away, And what I always loved about Richard Kim was he had a way of making you feel so inferior and you thanking him for it. You know, it was like, just, you know, and I used to think, oh, you know, that's why I say we should have had this interview when I was younger, because I knew everything then, you know. And Richard Kim was always very good at making sure that, you know, you didn't know shit, you know, to everything. Oops, can I say that?
Oh, you say whatever you want. You say whatever you want.
Anyway, so I went down, and it was like a week-long thing, and that was it. I was mesmerized. I was mesmerized by him, and the journey. He opened a door back in those days for me that I went through it, and that journey really continues on to these days. But two things that I remember from that particular seminar, which would cause really a vortex for me, and what I refer to as this domino effect for me, was I learned two things, and Sensei Suino will know this. In Japanese, one is called Onkochi Shin, and the other is called Bunburyodo. And okay, I can't write it for you. Onkochi Shin these are what they call 4-pattern lexems. Okay, I can say it to you in Japanese, but. So there are 4 ideograms, and independently they mean something, but when they are collectively put together and read in what they call old school kambun, they mean something else. And it's very interesting magic, especially, you know, in a dojo, because you have science and art coming together to create something very magical. And these lexems create that. Onkochi Shin very simply means this. It stirs up an emotion inside a person that if they were able to understand the origins of how something was cradled, then you would subsequently understand how it became what it became.
Sure.
Because you knew it. So Onkochi Shin kind of means something like study the old, understand the new. Or study the past and understand the present with regards to.
By the way, Sensei, I'm not being glib with this. It sounds like also cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm not being glib. I mean, to understand our roots, we then understand how we became what we are.
I'm just pretending to be intelligent. I know you guys are. That's true. It's a cognitive. And what I found most interesting about the lessons by Mr. Kim, where you walked out of that lecture hall thinking, in my case, thinking, I don't know anything. That was number one. But with such an enthusiastic passion about wanting to learn that. You got to remember now, this is all pre-internet. There's no, I can't Google this to find out what it is. You used to actually have to go to a library and look in a book in those days, you know, and because you couldn't ask anybody because nobody else knew what the hell was going on. And the other one was called Bunbu Ryodo. And the Bunbu Ryodo is kind of, for the lack of a better description, is the pen and the sword, you know, in constant accord. So the pen, you saw that crest I wear? You ever see the crest I wear? Actually, I don't even have one in front of me, but it's kind of like 2 points facing opposite to each other like this, you know? And one is like this. I don't know. Can you see that? I'll just see that like that.
Okay.
One of these represents the kisaki. A kisaki is the, as you know, as you guys all know, is the tip of the warrior's blade. And the fudo saki is the point of the scholar's brush. So it's like the pen and the sword. It's like the physical and the non-physical, or the metaphysical or the philosophical type of thing. And they say in order to, in old school 4-term lexicon, shikishis, where you find these things written, the philosophy behind this was this: in order to best embrace the way, or the Nietzsche, the pathway, is you need to have a balance between your physical training and your scholarly or intellectual pursuit. Mm-hmm. If you don't have this, there's a balance. There's an imbalance, and usually the imbalance is quickly noticed largely through character. You know, oh, fuck you, I'm the tough guy. My style's the best, or you know, or don't get me wrong. I mean, I love that pedagogical spectrum. You know, here on the one side are the alpha athletes, men, women, whoever, and in 5 seconds they can learn to do something better than you. And then on the other side of that spectrum, God love them, are the people who couldn't do anything if their life depended on it. And thank God that the law of reciprocity guarantee that they will enjoy the training forever. And then in the middle of that spectrum, you have the average person type of thing. That's where the joke comes from. How long does it take for the average guy to get a black belt? Average people don't get black belts, as you know. So it has to do then with this investment of training. And there's a difference from a pedagogical point of learning, practicing, and then training. And we wrap this up in this shuhari thing, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But I just want to just wrap the shoelace up here on the thing. So
Great.
So that was a little bit of the lineage of how I entered into what we did. The horse and 7 directions of being just so excited about stuff. I didn't care. So I was telling you a quick story when you told me, hey, let's go back there. I'm in Tokyo, it's early years, and a guy says to me, he's a friend of mine, he's an archaeologist. Sorry, he's a PhD candidate wanting to be an archaeologist.
Uh-huh.
He goes, hey, there's this group, they just unearthed this old temple tomb, and on the side of it, they got all these, it's a complete systematized martial art. So that's at that point. I was with this group called shoot fighters in Japan in those days. We'll save that for another part of this conversation. So by that time, I'm not looking. I don't care that karate is not from Canada. It's not even from Japan. It's not from Okinawa. It's not even from China. I've been to China so many. It wasn't the Shaolin Temple. I was getting very disoriented. I was getting confused. Where is it all from? I thought it was karate. Then I thought it was no, it's Okinawa. And it wasn't Okinawa, and I figured, it's China. I'm going to China. I go to China. It's not from China. Oh no, you've got to go to Shaolin. I go to Shaolin. Don't even get me started. The commercialism. I just was very disappointed. And anyway, but I feel very comfortable up here with Takada no Wahiko. And by the way, our gym we would change. We used to be called the UWFI. We changed our name to Pride. We became the Pride Fighters. Pride. Submission fighters type of thing back in the day. And so I liked it there because they were nice guys. Nobody was wrapped up in, this self-entitlement stuff. And they were, we just trained and lifted weights, ran, did our road work, ate a bowl, ate out of the, they were nice people and you trained hard. And I remember one day watching the guys after training, up in the ring. We didn't use a cage, by the way, and that's another story. We politics, forget that. We're training in the ring. It's the end of the day, and I see a couple of guys. Now you got to remember, these guys are not karate people. And I see one of the guys whose name is Anjo, by the way. And Anjo's going like, and he goes like this, and he goes like this, and he does that, and I go, excuse me. すいません、ちょっと閉まるんですけども。What? Sorry, I got a question. Can I ask you a question? いいですよ、どうぞ。何でしょうか。この技についての質問あるんですけども、どういう意味でしょうか。Hey, this technique you just did it. Like, what are you doing there? And he goes, it's just a technique. Yeah, but that's like right out of Basai Dai, man. That's like Basai Dai. And he would go like this to me. Basai Nani? Like, what's Basai? I said, Basai no karate no dento no kata desu kedomo. It's a rich traditional. And he'd go, kata wakaru desu kedomo. I don't know anything about kata. And I go, that's a kata, man. Anyway, he'd say, let me show you what this is. And so anyway, I get in the ring with him, and he'd say, okay. He'd say, now, throw something at me, throw a shot or whatever you want to do to get in. And I said, okay, because it was stand up, clinching on the ground. Those are the 3 years that we worked on, right? Because we weren't in a cage, right? So there was no cage work. Right. That was a new thing. We didn't get that till 1993 when the Gracies did the Octagon. That's another story. So I'm up against a rope, and I'm it's a little bit difficult to balance. And the next thing I know is he's shoving his palm up in my face. And he's got my arm wrapped. He's got an overhook. Sorry. He's got an overhook on my left hand.
Yep.
So the only hand right is my face. So I with a free hand, of course, I got to push the hand like this. And when I push the hand like this, he then wraps the arm, snakes right around my neck, puts a guillotine on me, and then he takes the other free hand and kept his hand, and he just turns up and go, and I said, well, let me try that again. He goes, that's too late. So I said, well, let's try one more time. So we tried it again, and then I tried to escape. So because my feet were free, I thought about separating my legs, putting my hands on his hips, and then getting some distance, because that's a classic way of trying to come up underneath a guillotine. And as I separated my leg, he then took his right leg. Now, in wrestling, in collegiate wrestling, we would have called this a grapevine. He just slid this grapevine around my right leg.
Yep.
You know, he slid in it, and then he. So there's, you know, flexion, extension, pronation, supination. He adducted his thighs together, so my leg was trapped.
Yep.
As he had the hand like this, he pressed it like this. And I went, ah! So in between falling asleep on this blood deprivation, I'm having this moment, I'm having this epiphany as he's squeezing the shit out of me. What? Stop it! And I said, that is the classic move out of Upside Down. And actually, what he said is, he said, now I get it. He said, you're interested in all these solo representations I'm doing. And I go, yeah, like they're katas. He goes, well, look, I don't know them as katas. We merely know them as escapes and counters for all of these acts of violence,
right,
that are habitual in the practice that brings us together. And I went, time out, jump ahead. My friend from Cairo, you got to come to Cairo, man. He said, I'm telling you, you got to go. And I jumped on an airplane. I fly to Johannesburg. I go from Johannesburg to, that's another story, by the way. I had a little problem with the engine coming off of the wing. Those people listening to this story, they'll know this story very well. I'm glad that I walked away from that. Anyway, long story short, 5 days later, I wind up in Cairo. I go over, I take the, there's a little boat you take down the Nile River to a place called Amenia. I go to Amenia, take the camel ride over to this place called the Beni Hassan Temple Tombs. And presto, there you go. Right on the wall, I see, in addition to weapons and occupation and horses and warriors and all that, an empty-handed Egyptian fighting art that has to do with percussive impact and seizing on the ground, standing up in the clinch. And that was the last, for me, it was the last straw. I didn't need it to be from Japan anymore. I didn't need it to be from, because I needed it. I needed that. I had a lot invested. My narrative was Japanese, Okinawa, and and that was kept losing it because we're going back to Chinese again. We're going back to Kung Fu. And that was the last straw then for me to realize it was human being against human being. And so I try to, as I was starting to teach seminars and getting popular and build a reputation for teaching seminars. Thank you, Terry O'Neill, Fighting Arts International. I still love you for that. People kept asking, what's your style? What's your style? What's your style? What's your style? I kept saying, look at it, it's kind of a collection of two-person drills I've learned from everybody you can imagine that kind of makes sense when I apply them to this acts of physical violence that are habitual and done. And nobody wanted to hear that because that didn't fit any narrative anybody knew.
Sure.
And I remember, really, that caused a lot of problems for me, by the way. And I remember talking to my instructor. And by the way, when I went to Japan, one of the instructors I sought out was Kenjo Hiroshi, because he had been one of Richard Kim's teachers. And he lived to be very, very old in his mid-90s, by the way. So he's already retired by the time I met him, but he took me on as a private student. Another story there. And so anyway, that's a kind of a fascinating look at the value of meeting Richard Kim, of appreciating what studying history does for you. And that's just from an academic. I mean, forget about, the other values of history of not repeating mistakes that have been made and learning direction. And we're talking here on an open forum. I'm sure people are getting a kick out of this, especially the ones who've known me for many years. Is, today a lot of people focus on things like, rank, lineage, and time and grade, none of which have anything to do with protecting your ass, by the way, but, and nothing to do with functionality, right? And so, but, in a Confucian-based culture, or especially a conformist-based culture like Japanese culture, where the seed of the mindset is Confucian-based, based on filial piety and ancestor worship, where there's let me put that into context, where there's no questioning of authority, and there's a mechanism, there's a timeless mechanism kept in place called the Senpai Kohai system, where through imitative behavior and the trickle-down effect, a particular mindset is perpetuated, where you can never break out of that. And then, of course, there's we gaijins. And then, of course, because we don't tend to think in the same way, and we want to question the death out of everything. Why? And you mentioned in the introduction, that I like science and principles and mechanics, and the reason why I like those and I put my faith in them is because they never change. You can manipulate the hell out of them, but they themselves never change. Flexion is flexion, extension is extension, force is mass times acceleration. These are mechanics that you either learn how to do or you don't learn how to do, type of thing. And so basing my exploration on those factual informations, the study of Onkoji Shin and Bunburi, they'll kind of allow me to break free, so to speak, and gave me a form of independence that I no longer require to say some authoritarian say to me, "What's wrong?
Sure.
No, that's not the way we do it. No. There you go. It's all, And so I just realized, look at the clock, I'm talking for so long. I never get a chance.
Let me interrupt for a second, because
you will never get rid of them.
We got 10 questions. You get to answer 10 questions. These are the 10 questions every guest gets. And by the way, you can take as much time to answer as you like, although generally the guests try to go with what's off the top of their head. And then we'll come back.
This is recorded, right? This is recorded.
Oh, this is recorded. You get to watch this back.
Oh, we're not live, right?
We are live-ish. So we've got a group of people watching right now, and then they've asked some questions that I want to get to. And then we'll go back, and later people can watch it on YouTube or listen to it as a podcast.
How badly have I embarrassed myself? So, okay.
Zero badly. By the way, that Egyptian shit, that's gold. I can't wait to look that up or chat with you more about it at another time.
Hang on, the helicopters are flying up again.
Oh yes, DTLA, baby. For those who don't know, Sensei McCarthy's in downtown LA, and I've spent a fair bit of time there, and it's a trip for sure, especially these days. Are you ready for your 10 questions?
If there's any time left, yeah.
Oh, we got time. It's your time. What's the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
The most effective move for me?
Yes.
So now, and we're speaking about the idea of self-defense, right? Is that the concept?
However you want to hear the question, Sensei. It's whatever you think is the most effective move. We've had varied answers.
Look, I have an immediate answer I'm going to tell you right away, but let me just say this. I'm such a contextual based person that if somebody says to me, well, last time you said this, I said, well, yeah, but we were talking about it in a telephone booth. Now we're talking about it in a pub, or, so context is very important for me. The fight in the dog in the fight, and the circumstances in which it happens are the three mitigating circumstances for me to usually make a comment on what's best and what's not best, okay? I always found this. The best thing is that there is no best thing. If I can give you what I think is an answer, the best thing is there is no best thing. And as soon as somebody says, the best thing is this, I'm going the other way, type of thing. It's like, so there was a guy in England back in the day, his name was Lenny Mclean. They call him the governor, by the way. Did you ever see the movie Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels?
Absolutely.
Great film, by the way. Lenny was the collector. Smoked, had a big cigar. That was really Lenny Mclean.
Okay.
And I met a couple of guys he fought with. Roy Shaw was one of them, by the way. Anyway, Lenny was a guy, kind of a allegedly undefeated boxer, but never fought in a professional boxing match. Sorry. Let me try that again. He never fought in a licensed, like, WBA, WBC, but he fought in a lot of underground matches. And you Google him, YouTube him. He's all over the place, In fact, that fight with Roy Shaw is great. The guy puts a cigar out and comes out in the middle, and Roy Shaw comes in, headbutts him in the face to start the fight. That thing, And Lenny hits him with that big, Hellboy's fist, which is like a massive fist with no wrist, and then stomps on his face a few times, just to give you an idea. So what might work for Lenny Mclean? All 340 pounds of him at 5'7", probably not going to work for your wife or something like that. You know what I mean? So that's why I kind of stay away from the best thing type of thing. But anyway, if it was self-defense, in my opinion, best thing, run like hell.
Right on. Who's the most influential martial artist in your life?
Again, contextually based. I can't look right off the top of my head. I have to tell you, probably Bruce Lee. Who wasn't he the most influential to? You know, but Bruce Lee didn't influence me to study philosophy. And by the way, I was very passionate about the philosophy that Bruce Lee wrote until I found out that it came from Krishnamurti. You know, Bruce Lee in 1972 said this. Krishnamurti in 1962 said that. You know, sorry. Anyway, so Richard Kim, of course. I mean, the guys, right. Guys like the Pied Piper. You know, I mean, Wally J was another guy who was very influential for me. I mean, there's lots of people. You know, my first instructor. I mean, you know, a lot of people who go to Mogun, Dojo, Dojang, Club, whatever, you know, they go there and if they don't jive with the instructor, you know, if the instructor doesn't captivate them, there's very few people who are just so hardcore. It doesn't matter. You could beat them up every day and then we'll leave. You know, I mean, that's a really hardcore part. But these days, you know, I don't want to, my mother's gonna sue, you know, there's so much that type of stuff, you know. So usually it's an instructor that usually is very charismatic, you know, and you know, cares a lot about their students. That kind of attracts a person, you know. I just found Richard Kim was a very alluring, you know, I wasn't a well-educated kid, you know. I mean, I went back later and pursued, you know, an academic education with a passion. But I mean, in those days, you know, I kind of learned as I needed to type of thing, contextually based, you know. So he was very, you know, and Wally J. I'd say probably those three guys are probably the most influential.
And you touched on this already, the most influential artist of all time, and why?
Well, I think that it's a very special quality that a person can have to help motivate a person. And, you know, motivation can be in several areas, you know. You don't always have to become a champion or, you know, a person who's able to influence the direction, growth and direction of another individual. I mean, I know I'm singing to the choir here, but what's more gratifying in life, especially at my age, our age, you know, for some of you guys, is to help empower another person through something that's giving you strength. I mean, come on, I look back at that type of stuff and I have tons of stories of, you know, getting correspondence from people and bumping into people on the street. And, you know, here's an interesting story for you. You know, first time I ever went to the Philippines, I took one of my senior students with me to teach a seminar. And Philippines is a, you know, it's a pretty rough place, you know, especially after Subic Bay, after the Americans moved out, right? Anyway, I'm there and I got one of my senior students with me, senior-ish students. Anyway, we get off the airplane, we're walking down into the terminal, and this guy walks by me and goes, "Excuse me, are you Sensei McCarthy?" And I went, "Yes, I am." He goes, "Oh my God, I'm so-and-so, you know, I just like to, can I get a photograph with him?" I went, "Yeah, sure." And I remember my other student going, "God, they know you everywhere." And I said, "That's never happened in my whole life before. I swear to God, we get into the terminal, it happens again."
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's you know, but it was people who I knew from before. It was people who you helped make. I mean, we're all fighting battles in life. You know, you just never know who's maybe the happiest guy in the world or the most depressed person in the world. You just really never know. And that's why I think that the greater part in what we do is really the modest. You know, I mean, I'm a really outgoing person. But that's usually just a cover for really how introverted I am, you know. But I love what I do, and I know that other people love this. And I know that I learned very early in life that adversity was the mechanism. So failure, you know, what's the joke now? You know, there's winning and losing, and I guess now there's winning and learning. I wish I had learned that lesson earlier in lifetime, because I get terribly depressed when I lost and stuff like that, you know. But anyway, you know, you asked me about that, and I think, yeah, I mean. So for me, what's gratifying, yeah, is helping other people, is helping to empower anybody else. And it doesn't matter who they are, what the set of circumstances were. And you know, can I just say this one honest? I did this thing with a bunch of other very, very senior martial art peoples over here in Hollywood some months ago. Oh, it must have been Yeah, it was just before Demura Sensei's tournament. We all met at Masters. That's what we were at Masters Studio. Yeah, Masters. And we did this meeting of the round table. That's what it was. Yeah. Sensei Merriman, Brian Ritchie, lots of these guys, right? And a lot of guys, I knew these guys. I know these guys for 50 years, right? But, I mean, Sensei Chuck Merriman. I mean, this guy was like a kind of a surrogate father for me as a kid on the tournament. In the tournaments, he'd give me money to go get a sandwich type of thing because I spent all my money going to the tournament type of thing. Anyway, and so being at those events and being with guys like that, I thought, oh, this one guy really, really super admired him. But I always thought, this guy, he doesn't like me, So I always kind of kept my distance, when in doubt, just be quiet, and I was always very, very courteous, And anyway, we're doing this thing and the microphone's going around, guys going, what are some of the most impressive things you've ever seen in your life as a martial artist? Sensei Merriman says this, and Emil, Emil Farkas, Beverly Hills Karate Studio. He taught all the movie stars. It was when I worked with Herb Alpert at Tijuana. He's doing all this type of stuff. And anyway, this other guy, I'm on the end. He gets me and he goes, "And what was one of the most impressive things you ever did?" He goes, "I was in Kyoto one year at the Dai Nippon Butokukai Martial Art Festival, and I had the privilege of watching a young master present his art. And that, to me, was one of the most, I was just like, wow, man, who was that? Like, I've been there. I know you were there. I mean, what are you talking about?" And so the interviewer, Warner, says, "Well, who was it?" He goes, "It was Hansi Patrick McCarthy." I went,
Damn.
Yeah, I was like, I went, okay. Yeah, you caught me off guard with that one. That was,
yeah.
But I mean, what a wonderful thing to say. That was Sensei Brian Ritchie, from Butokai. Guy's a remarkable human being to start with. So, kind of goes both ways, right? Are we still there? You're frozen.
Yeah, you just hung up for a sec.
Are we back?
I think we are. I think everyone give a thumbs up. Okay, it could be me. Am I? Let me see if you hear this. What excites you most about the next 5 years of your training?
Yes, I heard that. Shall I answer it?
That'd be great. That's the next question of our list. I'm sorry that we glitched a bit there. So we're on to the next. What excites you most about the next 5 years of your training?
Well, the next 5 years of my particular training will be in Okinawa. We're immigrating back to Japan, by the way. I lived in Japan for many years. And long story short, my son and daughter have all grown up and they're pursuing their own lives now. And so I wanted to come to the United States to help build my organization here. And it was going to be the California dream. And I don't know what I was thinking. My mind was still back in the 70s with regards to California dreaming, so to speak. And it's just not, I don't want to harp on it, but it's just not what we expected. And look at it. Admittedly, it was probably the very worst time to come here. And once we just got all totally settled in and our belongings arrived and we got all set up in this, I'm in a beautiful place, and then it was the COVID thing, and then it was, and now it's politics at its very worst. It's the American presidential election coming up in another 2 months. Yeah. And I got to tell you, it's and the violence and it's terrible. I don't want to harp on the political thing, but this is what we want. My wife is a tiny little Japanese woman. She's afraid to go out at night. I have an app on my phone. It's called Crime Mapping, and it tells you, and you can target it for Beverly Hills, West LA, Compton, wherever you're. And I've got mine just for my street. Sure. And look at the crime that goes on here. Oh yeah. So we're gone. We're out of here. So you're excited to get back to Okinawa? Yeah, I'm gonna go to Okinawa and open my dojo there and teach and train in Okinawa. And it's funny because my master Kinjo Hiroshi, he always said to me, he said, "You'll be back. You'll come back." And he said, "I know you won't come to the mainland." He said, "Okinawa is where you'll be." And I went, "Nah, I don't think so. It's too small for me." You called it. I was just there, a year before last, and it's changed so much. There's highways now. There's a tram. There's a train. Yeah, the airport is spectacular, and there's so many people. You know, when I first went to Okinawa back in 1985, you know, I literally couldn't even say one word. I learned how to say daijobu. That was my only word I ever learned. I learned it from Sensei Sylvan. You know, he taught me daijobu, and I didn't know any of the words. You know, now it's a different story. Now that I don't have any problem, you know, getting by, you don't need Japanese anymore. Anybody can go to Okinawa, and the English is almost everybody speaks English, and all the restaurants are, you know. So anyway, that's the next 5 years of my training will be about embracing the art that brings us together in the homeland of karate.
Beautiful. I wish you well on that journey. Your favorite film and TV martial artist, and the one that you'd want to fight the most if you had a chance, living or dead?
Oh goodness! Look at for me. I mean, for the TV guys, Bruce Lee, of course, you know, but probably I want to train with Choki multiple, you know, multiple Choki, hands down for me. You know, he was my type of guy. You know, bite, headbutt, smash the glass in the face. You know, that's what I grew up with. You know, so I like that. I know in the reality part, unless it's a weapon or a gang related, you know, that it's best. And he was the man. But you know, it's funny, we talk about Bruce Lee a lot. Like, you know, actually just a couple of days, last week was Bob Wall's 81st birthday. And, you know, he was O'Hara in Enter the Dragon, you know, and he's been in more Bruce Lee movies than everybody else, you know, as the villain, so to speak.
Right.
I was at his 80th birthday last year, and, you know, John Saxon, John Saxon sadly just passed away. I got to know John quite well as well. And, you know, of course I met Bruce Lee's wife, and so I know Danny Inosanto, and I trained with him many times over the years, and Taki Kimura. So I got to know a lot of Bruce's students, and the, you know, the idea of no way being away, and throw out this and use science. You know, he's been extremely influential with me, you know, but more for the scientific side of things. But even though, you know, I talk a lot about science, which you know, when I need to fact check, I don't go to hearsay or myth or mythology. I go to science.
Right.
But that said, I love Japanese culture. And especially the Okinawan version of Japanese culture. So Japanese culture is, you know, very formal, and very, in my opinion, very pensive, and very penetrating, and very personal. And you know, there's a tatemae honnai, you know, there's the facade, and there's the, you know, which is completely different, because the idea of individualism in the culture is not the same as we embrace it, you know, because of Christianity, Judo Christianity. And so there's that dichotomy there, which I find is a beautiful thing, incidentally. But I mean, the food and the culture and the language and the customs, I absolutely love it. Now just take that, and it's like going to Hawaii, you know. You go to Hawaii, Hawaii's part of America. Yeah, we'll get there tomorrow, not necessarily today. It's very laid back. And Okinawa is like that, very laid back. Plus they have their own food and
absolutely.
Yeah, so I like that, and I love the Zen idea of things. Less is more for me. Giving is getting, and you know, so you know, it's like when people come to my house, they go, "You don't have any paintings on the wall." I said, "No, you know, well, I have a wall hanging. I have a, you know, but I love that very simplistic type thing. So I'm not, and it's interesting because when I was a kid, I used to have like a watch and a ring and a necklace, you know, the hairstyle and all that type of stuff. And today, you know, I don't do that. I have swords. I like swords a lot. That's my that and cars. I have to get rid of the cars, by the way. But cars and swords, those are my weak points. You know, I like Italian cars, and I like Japanese swords. You know, so.
Well, whenever I get too into my guitars or my cars myself, I just go, "Hey, I'm not enlightened yet." If everyone in the world could have one benefit that you've gotten from martial arts, whether they do martial arts or not, what would you like everyone in the world to have that you've gotten?
Oh, it's the same thing as I close all of my lectures when I talk about Japanese culture and anthropology. It's the same thing. Liking what we do to a pathway. It depends how far down the pathway you get before it becomes evident that the destination is not the goal, it is the journey. And so one of the things that adversity and consistency teach you with a mentor is that, you know, it doesn't matter what happened yesterday and tomorrow hasn't arrived. So don't regret the past, fear the future, miss the moment. It's all about right now. So the message that this fighting art through adversity teaches you this is you're not the best, and that the only way to continually, is to enjoy life, is to continually struggle to make tomorrow a little bit better than today. So it's interesting because a lot, that sounds like Tony Robbins. I go, oh, does it really? He goes, yeah, that sounds like the Kaizen. That's a Japanese. I said, oh, that's so. You know. This is the thing about studying history, right? Is the Kaizen thing that the Japanese talk about, that Tony Robbins invented, is actually from Henry Ford. Ford was the guy who initiated this idea that if we can be a little bit better tomorrow than we are today, then that progress will guarantee a great future for us. And so he came up with this idea of constant and never-ending improvement. And it's interesting because the acronym is CANI, C-A-N-I. And people talk about that, oh, that's the Kaizen philosophy. But anyway, so I told you earlier that I was a high school dropout. And but the couple of things I do remember very well from my school year, other than my sports, a couple of girls, was I had a teacher who emphasized the value of reading. I love to read. I read a book in the bathroom this morning. I just love reading. And two books I read in the school that have stayed with me all these years. One was called The Chrysalids, and it was again, it was people from outer space, but it was about transition. You know, it was about discriminatory racism, but was outer space instead, right? And anyway, it was all about the inward journey. And the other one was called As a Man Thinketh. Now, that's a terribly discriminatory title, but it was written by a Victorian-based writer named James Allen. So and it's a free download, by the way. And by the way, James Allen made perfectly sure that everybody in the world would know that even though there's a copyright attached to books, and you know it's changed over the years how the copyright works. But he said, I want to make sure that my work is never copyrighted and everybody can have it for free. That's a 50-page read, but I can tell you one thing, it is the most profound work I've ever read. I probably have read that 500 times, maybe 500 times. You know, I use it in my instructor's training program. And it's all about the journey within. So that's my answer.
Wonderful, Sensei. So the last two questions I have is going to effectively be your last answer before we go round the horn and then say goodnight. It's how we sort of go out on each of our podcasts, is that we'll start with Hanshi Legacy. We'll just say some thoughts, and then you'll have the last word. But before that, the last two questions, your greatest achievement, your greatest regret.
Well, I want to say that probably my greatest achievement is my marriage and my family. I'm gonna say that's, you know, whenever I have the moments to myself, I can tell you this, that in February of 2000, as I was accelerating down to the earth in a 767-300, whose engine had fallen off, that's probably a bad word, but anyway, there was no engine on the left side of the airplane, and we were about to die. I thought about my wife and family. That's really, I wasn't, you know, frightened or anything. I was very, very calm, to tell you the truth. Yeah. I just thought about my wife and family. My regrets, you know, I don't really know if I have any regrets, you know. I know that, you know, the old expression, if you had to do it again, would you do it differently? Probably would, you know. My mouth got me in a lot of trouble over the years, you know. But I remember, you know, the understatement of the year, you know. But I can remember, I've never started a fight with anybody ever. I never once ever started a fight. I have ended lots of them. I have been ended in the fights as well, but I never started any trouble. I tend to, you know, my heart is on my cuff, you know. When I say I'm not a deep thinker, I mean, I'm not a plotter. I'm going to get that guy or something like that. You know, I love, you know, loyalty and friendship mean a lot to me. I fight for those types of things, you know. I'm very quick to support the underdog, which is to my detriment. Not worked out for me every time, but nah, I don't have any regrets. You know, I've had a wonderful life. It's been I don't, you know, they say don't regret the past or fear the future or miss the moment, and I don't. You know, I know we all have a time limit, and I know that, you know, we're not going to be around long forever, and I probably lived more than most folks, you know, if you're looking for the, you know, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, you know, at this age and stage, I'm just, you know, I love being around people who are passionate about what it is that we do. I learn stuff all the time from people. You know, I did an interview with these German guys last year in, no, not last year, sorry, the year before. I was teaching a seminar, and a guy says, there was a guy who was like, he was the guy who had the drum. Oh, he died, Walter, I forgot. Sorry, Walter. Anyway, I was teaching a technique. And I taught it exactly the way I knew it, exactly the way it had worked for many, many years. And this guy was like a green belt. He was doing it wrong. Okay, sorry, that's bad thing, sorry. He was doing it not the way I showed him. And I was going, look, that's better. But I said, that's better than what I'm doing. That works. And I went, guys, stop, come on in. What's your name? You know, la, 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 show the technique. Okay, I showed it to you this way. Look at that. Let's do it that way. And everybody goes, yeah, good, let's do it. You know, that's like the group I'm with. We're very open-minded, right? Anyway, the interview guy says to me, goes, excuse me, did you just give a technique from the beginner over there? And I went, oh, yeah, I guess. He goes, anyway, the point is that he was like, it didn't sit well with him that I taught a technique and the beginner was doing it differently, but I publicly said it was better than what I was doing, and let's do it instead. Oh, that wasn't, yeah. I thought that was great. I went, you know, that I can learn something at my own seminar from a participant, right? Come on. And that's not a secret. I learn lots of stuff from participants at my seminars all the time. I might not tell everybody that, but it happens all the time, you know. So, anyway.
Well, thank you for those 10 question answers. And we're going to go around the horn now, and we're going to make our way out. Sadly, time is a real thing, at least in this mortal coil. Hansha Legacy, what do you want to say to take us out for Sensei McCarthy?
Well, it's nice to see where everything took him from our first years in London when we met. It's quite interesting. Mine was not quite so vast. So that's good to hear.
Sensei Suino?
It's just so great to be able to put a face and a voice to the authorship. You know, Sensei, I've been reading your books for years, and I love hearing your words, hearing the words from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Sensei Dauphin?
Yeah, you know, as we were talking about all this stuff, Sean, I'm just thinking about being in Canada and New Brunswick, and how people come out of there, and it's a simple thing sometimes that changes the lives of lots of people. So, you know, Hansha McCarthy, when he was young, somehow in New Brunswick found his way into a judo dojo, and then how many people were changed because he found his way there. That's an interesting path to a ninth dan in karate from New Brunswick as a child through that. I really like when he talks about bunkai first and how, you know, it's not a chicken and egg thing. It really is. The bunkai came first and the kata came second. And that's just what it is. I like what he said about helping other people and empowering other people. That's something we've heard many people on this call talk about, that's one of the things that they're grateful for in their journey. I like when he said the destination it's not the goal, it's the journey, right? The journey is what it's about. It's not about the destination. And adversity teaches you the struggle, you know, to just try and make every day, the next day, better than today. That's something I think we all can take away and try and do. And, you know, greatest achievement, family, we can all relate to that. That's something that Hanchitarian, I've heard him say. It's interesting. Hanchitarian often, when he messages me, I'll say, I'm with my daughter right now, and he'll say, oh, family first. So it's nice to hear that.
He's a beautiful person. I love him very much. And Terry Lynn as well as another wonderful. They're kind of like family away from family. But you know, just on one comment you made about the kata, for example, I've always tried to struggle through, you know, something that perhaps I saw very clearly, someone else didn't see, and I would think, I wonder how I can kind of come up with a way to help them see that as well, you know. And one of the comments, you were talking about controversial comments, was I said, you know, kata was never meant to actually teach anybody anything. It was actually meant to culminate the lesson one should have already learned in a two-person drill, which when you separate the contextual premise and use, you know, you kind of replicate it into a solo reenactment, a ritualized template, and then link the templates together into some geometry, the end result is getting something greater than the sum total of its individual parts. And presto, therein lies the content. Now, the fact that it has this wonderfully myriad beneficial practices from a holistic and spiritual and physical and cardio and all that type of those are all byproducts, you know. And whoa, man, I'll tell you, when the powers of be heard me say that, it was like, you know. But you know, now it's funny. The joke in my organization is you know, when I started, you know, going forward to teach this in the early 1990s, is, you know, and everybody and his brother loved what we were doing. But then as soon as the internet, in, you know, May of 1996, when I went online for the first time, wow, I tell you, I thought at one point people were giving out prizes for who could attack me the most, you know, and McCarthy, the, you know, bastard, la, la, la. I couldn't do anything right. You know, I was like, if McCarthy can walk on water, it's because the bastard can't swim. You know, everything was just absolutely terrible. And so the joke here now, in 25 or 30 years later, is that those people who criticize me the most, you know, two-person drills and groundwork and clinch, doesn't happen. There's no such thing as tegumi and all that type of stuff. Those people are being congratulated now for what they criticize, for teaching for what they criticized me for back in the day. And so I always think about that in a private moment. I go, let's go. Anyway, questions.
I totally get that. Sometimes you can be too early an adopter for people to get it. You know, the thing I want to go out on before you get the last word is, you know, your translation of the Bubishi was one of the first works I read as a martial artist where I just really went, holy shit, I have roots that run so deep with this, further back than I thought. And I just want to thank you for bringing that translation forward. The other thing that Sensei Dauphin did mention is the bunkai. You know, researching for this interview and watching a lot of your stuff and looking at that in-close stuff that you're working with, did a lot of martial artists who do karate and stand-up avoid. I really enjoy that. And honestly, you know, everybody who's come in here as one of our guests has a humility. And the one thing I just want to say, and again, I'm not being glib, is I think you're going to have trouble writing that book about yourself because your humility is so apparent in how interested you are in everybody else and what those other stories are. I just don't see you getting to it. And I say that as a compliment because to me, that's where your humility shines, is constantly being a student of this. It's so evident in chatting with you. So we throw the last word to you, but before we do, I just want to ask Sensei to talk to us about the next couple of weeks here. We might be a hint up in the air, Sensei, or tell us what's happening, and then we'll give it to Sensei McCarthy for the last word.
Yeah, we're next Thursday. The plan is for Grandmaster Merriman, and then the Thursday after that, it'll be a surprise.
It worked out.
Thursday after that, it will be a surprise, and then we're going to take a little bit of a break. But we have lots of people coming up. Sensei Suino lined up a couple of people, and I have a couple of irons in the fire, and. Yeah, and we wouldn't take the break, but if it wasn't for the fact that you're apparently a professional movie actor and you have some business to do for a few weeks. And
what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Sorry, what are you going to do? Got to go make a living. So thanks for accommodating me with this, everybody watching and my fellow hosts and senseis. Thanks for that, Sensei Dauphin. Last word goes to you, Sensei McCarthy. What do you want to leave the people with before we all say goodnight?
Oh, look, I'm looking at the clock and I realize how much time I've taken talking about what I do and all that type of stuff. And some other people do people have some questions that they wanted me to
You know what?
to?
Well, those questions we can get to another time because it'd be great to have you back sometime. But for tonight, I think we're winding her up and we'd love to hear what you want to drop in everybody's ear.
Listen, Jess, you know, I mean, there's nothing more important than pursuing what it is that you believe in, you know. And I always thought, especially my advice for, not just for kids, you know, I don't work with many children because of what it is I do in the travels. I mostly work with adults and stuff like that. But, you know, I don't think there's anything more important in life than discovering what it is that you want to do in life. You know the expression, find whatever it is that you're truly passionate about. You never have to work a day in your life. And some people work to live, others live to work, type of thing, you know. And I always thought this, when I used to give a lecture, for example, I would talk forever, you know, but then at the end of the lecture, nobody had a question. You know what I mean? And I learned that in Japan, you know, because you have to learn your subject content very, very well. And when you make a presentation, you know, you have to give a abstract and an introduction and you know, a main point, you know, pick out your bullet points you're going to talk, points you're going to make, then you wrap it up in a conclusion and then maybe some moral or something like that. It's just a pretty standard, it's a story. Joseph Campbell, one of my favorite late American anthropologists, gave me that type of thing, you know. And I always thought, you know, every generation tends to produce people who, in an effort to keep whatever it is they do a living experience for the community that they serve, they tend to reinterpret these common or timeless messages. And but so even though the way they wrap it up and present it is different, the message is always the same. And the message is discovering who the heck you are. And so whatever it is that you do, I don't care if it's tiddlywinks or, you know, if that's what it takes to get you to figure out who the heck it is you are. And I got to tell you something, I don't know anything better than the fighting arts, because the one thing about the fighting arts right away is pain. And most people run from pain. But that's where a mentor, a sensei, a sifu, a person who's responsible for the care and direction of your learning, because it's not necessarily, you know, what it is that you learn. That's irrelevant, you know. It's how you learn and the approach to learning what it is that you're going to learn. That's everything. And that's why it's kind of important, you know. It's okay for, you know, people to be on your back and you know, criticizing the death out of you, as long as it's constructive and they're able to, like, you know, if you criticize a weak person, the responsibility is always on the most intelligent person. That's why I think whenever there's a problem between two people, it's always going to be the smartest person's fault. That was something that was drilled into me when I was young, because I was thinking, well, you know, I think I'm pretty smart. But, you know, I figured, oh, Chris, the problem was maybe not my fault because I was too stupid to understand it. Wait, no, I wasn't. And just that one, let's say, the equivalent of a Zen koan, you know, the insolvable, I kept being very pensive about it. And the whole idea of thinking about it puts you on a pathway that takes you deeper inside yourself. So it's always like this. It's like, oh, you know, you've traveled all over the world. You've been to like 100 countries and la, la, la. I always think this. It's true. I love exploring and conquer the world. But, you know, it seemed like this. Every time I went somewhere further and further and further, I kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And ultimately, I just said, you know, I don't even want to travel anymore. I hate traveling. I love doing what I do. I just hate the traveling part, you know. And I travel in comfort, let me tell you. But I tell you, I don't like going on these long journeys. And I think the only message of value it's not about style. It's not about gi. It's not about winning. It's about finding something that means something to you. And by pursuing it, it teaches you more about you. And then once you discover what it is, it's like a gift. You then are responsible for giving it back away. And your job is to help empower others from what has given you strength. That's a message. For me anyway. For me, it's an important message. And I think it resonates with a lot of people because I seem to have a very unusual collection of friends, you know. They come from all kinds of walks of life, and you know, in spite of, we have a very kind of a informal gathering here tonight. I do this all week as well. COVID has been kind of bad and good for us, you know. The one thing is kind of brought me much closer together with a lot of our folks. And, you know, I have the online instructors programs, and I mentor a lot of people in various areas. And you know, so now we're getting off the line here now, and it's, you know, it's very late for you guys. It's 7:30 here for us, but it's daytime in Japan and Europe. And, you know, I've got to, when I hang up from you, I'll probably have a quick, another glass of water, and then get back on Zoom with some of my students overseas, type of thing. So anyway, that's what means a lot to me, is helping others. And I think the message is about, we're not here for long. And so, and it's really easy to be bad, and it's easy to be, you know, angry, and, you know, man, it's about love, you know, it's about nature, love, people, relationships. What else is there? You know, I mean,
yeah.
So put the fear thing in the back seat, put love in the front, and bless us all.
Thank you so much, Sensei McCarthy. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show, and I think all the guests have just gotten more than they can handle, and everybody can rewatch this on YouTube and on the podcast if you want to re-listen to any of this or any of our other stuff. And we're really glad you're all tuning in every week. We can't wait to see you know, the comments online from the people who couldn't make it tonight, and we just hope you have a wonderful week till we see you next week. Thanks again, Sensei McCarthy.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.